The Revolution of the Dialectic by Samael Aun Weor. The Fallacy of the Ego. The fallacy of the ego is the habit of deceiving without any limitation. The latter processing itself through the series of the I. Any person can commit the error of shooting his head, as is done by any cowardly and imbecile suicidal person, but the famous I of psychology will never be able to commit suicide. People of all pseudo-esoteric schools have magnificent ideals and even sublime intentions, but all of that continues existing in the field of subjective and miserable thinking. All of that is of the I. The I is always perverse. Sometimes it adorns itself with beautiful virtues and even wears the robe of sanctity. When the I wants to cease to exist, it does not do it in a disinterested and pure manner. It wants to continue in a different manner. It aspires to reward and happiness. During these mechanized times of life, there is production in series of cars, series of airplanes, series of machines of this or that brand, etc. Everything has become a series, and even the I itself is a series. We should know the series of the I. The I processes itself in series and more series of thoughts, sentiments, desires, hatreds, habits, etc. Let the dividers of the I continue dividing their ego between superior and inferior. Let them be with their theories and the touted superior and ultra-divine I controlling the miserable inferior I. We know very well that that division between superior I and inferior I is 100% false. Superior and inferior are two sections of the same thing. Superior I and inferior I are the two sections of Satan. Can perhaps a part of the I reduce another part of the I to dust? Can perhaps one part of the myself decree the law of exile to another part of the myself? The most that we can do is to astutely conceal what is convenient to us. To hide our perversities and smile like saints. This is the fallacy of the ego. The habit of deceiving. One part of the myself can hide another part of the myself. Is this something unusual? Does perhaps the cat not hide his claws? This is the fallacy of the ego. We all carry the Pharisee within us. We are very beautiful from the outside, but we are very rotten within. We have known Pharisees who are horrifying. We knew one who wore the immaculate robe of the Master. His hair was long, and a razor never shaved his venerable beard. This man frightened the entire world with his sanctity. He was 100% vegetarian. He drank nothing that could have alcohol. People knelt before him. We do not mention the name of this chocolate saint. We only limit ourselves to say that he had abandoned his wife and children supposedly to follow the path of sanctity. He preached beautiful things and spoke horrors against adultery and fornication, but in secrecy, he had many concubines. Arid proposed anti-natural sexual connections through non-vessels to his female devotees. Yes, he was a saint, a chocolate saint. This is how Pharisees are. Woe unto thee, hypocritical scribes and Pharisees, for thou cleanest the cup and the plate from the outside, but from within thou art full of theft and injustice. You do not eat meat, you do not drink alcohol, you do not smoke. Truly you appear just before men, but you are full of hypocrisy and evil within. With his fallacy of the ego, the Pharisee conceals the crimes from the eyes of others and also conceals them from himself. We know Pharisees who carry out tremendous fasts and frightening penitences. They are certain of being just and wise, but their victims suffer the unutterable. Almost always, it is their wives and their children who are innocent victims of their evils, but they continue with their sacred exercises convinced of being just and holy. The so-called superior I says, I will overcome anger, covetousness, lust, etc., but the so-called inferior I then laughs with the thunderous laughter of Aristophanes, and the demons of passions, terrified, flee to hide within the secret caverns of the different areas of the mind. This is how the fallacy of the ego functions. Every intellectual effort to dissolve the I is useless, because any movement of the mind belongs to the I. Any part of the myself can have good intentions, and so what? The path which leads to the abyss is paved with good intentions. That game or fallacy of one part of the myself which wants to control another part of the myself which has no desire of being controlled is interesting. Touching are the penitences of those saints who cause their wife and children to suffer. All those humilities of chocolate saints are funny. Admirable is the erudition of the know-it-alls. And so, what? The eye cannot destroy the eye, and it continues perpetuating itself throughout millions of years in our descendants. We should break the spell of all those useless efforts and fallacies. When the eye wants to destroy the eye, effort is useless. It is only by truly comprehending in depth what the useless battles of the mind are, it is only by comprehending the internal and external actions and reactions, the secret answers, the hidden motives, the concealed impulses, etc., that we can then attain the imposing stillness and silence of the mind. Upon the pure waters of the ocean of the universal mind we can contemplate in a state of ecstasy all the deviltries of the pluralized eye. When the eye can no longer hide, it is condemned to death. The eye likes to hide, but when it can no longer hide, the wretched one is lost. It is only in the serenity of the mind that we see the eye just as it is and not as it apparently is. To see the eye and comprehend it becomes an integral whole. The eye has failed after we have comprehended it because it inevitably becomes dust. The stillness of the ocean of the mind is not a result, it is a natural state. The swollen waves of thoughts are only an accident produced by the monster of the eye. The fatuous mind, the stubborn mind, the mind which says, "With time I will achieve serenity, one day I will get there," is condemned to failure because the serenity of the mind does not belong to time. Everything that belongs to time is of the eye. The eye itself is of time. Those who want to assemble the serenity of the mind, to assemble it like someone who assembles a machine by intelligently joining all of its parts, are in fact failures because the serenity of the mind is not constituted by several parts which can be assembled and disassembled, organized or disorganized, joined or separated. Effort. In order to experience the truth, one does not need any effort whatsoever. People are accustomed to exerting effort in everything and erroneously suppose that it is impossible to experience the truth without any effort. We may need effort to earn our daily bread or to play a game of football, or to carry a very heavy load, but it is absurd to believe that effort is necessary in order to experience that which is the truth. Comprehension replaces effort when one tries to comprehend the truth intimately hidden in the secret depth of each problem. We do not need any effort to comprehend each and all of the defects that we carry hidden in the different levels of the mind. We do not need effort to comprehend that envy is one of the most powerful triggers of the social machinery. Why do many people want to progress? Why do many people want to have beautiful residences and very elegant cars? The entire world envies what belongs to others. Envy is regret for others' well-being. Elegant women are envied by other less elegant women, and this serves to intensify struggle and pain. Those who do not have, want to have, and will not even eat in order to buy clothes and adornments of all types with the only objective of not being less than anyone. Every paladin of a great cause is mortally hated by the envious. The envy of the impotent, of the vanquished, of the mean person, is disguised with the judge's toga or with the robe of sanctity and of mastery, or with the sophism of applause, or with the beauty of humility. If we comprehend in an integral manner that we are envious, it is logical that envy then ends and in its place appears the star that rejoices and shines for others' well-being. There are persons who want to cease being covetous, but who covet not being covetous. There you have a form of covetousness. There are men who exert themselves in order to attain the virtue of chastity, but when they see a beautiful woman on the street, they pay her some beautiful compliments, and if the woman is a friend, they can do nothing less than ply her with attentions, tell her beautiful words, admire her, praise her beautiful qualities, etc. The secret intentions behind all that coquetry is found in the secret trigger of subconscious, tenebrous and submerged lust. When we comprehend without any effort whatsoever all the tricks of lust, the latter is annihilated, and in its place is born the immaculate flower of chastity. It is not with any effort that we can acquire those virtues. The eye is fortified when it exerts itself to acquire virtues. The eye loves decorations, medals, titles, honors, virtues, beautiful qualities, etc. Greek traditions narrate that Aristippus, as the philosopher, wanting to demonstrate his wisdom and modesty, put on an old robe full of patches and holes, clutched the staff of philosophy and walked on the streets of Athens. When Socrates saw him arrive at his house, he exclaimed, "Oh, Aristippus, your vanity shows through the holes of your clothes." The pedantic, the vain, the proud, believing themselves to be very humble, were the robe of Aristippus. Humility is a very exotic flower. Whoever boasts of humility is full of pride. In practical life, we make many useless efforts each time that a new problem torments us. We appeal to efforts to solve it. We struggle and suffer, but then, the only thing that we obtain is to commit inanities and to complicate existence more and more. The disillusioned, the disenchanted, those who no longer even want to think, those who were not able to solve a vital problem, find the solution when their mind is serene and tranquil, when they had no hope whatsoever. No truth can be comprehended by means of effort. The truth comes like a thief in the night, when one least expects it. Extrasensory perceptions during meditation, illumination, the solution to a problem, are only possible when no kind of conscious or subconscious effort exists, when the mind does not exert itself to be more than it is. Pride also disguises itself as being sublime. The mind exerts itself to be something more than it is. The mind, serene like a lake, can experience the truth, but when the mind wants to be something more, it is in tension. It is in struggle, and then, the experience of the truth becomes impossible. We should not mistake the truth with opinions. Many think that the truth is this or that, or that the truth is this or that book, or this or that belief or idea, etc. The one who wants to experience the truth should not mistake beliefs, ideas, opinions, and theories with that which is the truth. We should experience the truth in a direct, practical, and real manner. This is only possible in the stillness and silence of the mind, and this is achieved by means of meditation. To experience the truth is fundamental. It is not by means of effort that we can experience the truth. The truth is not the result. The truth is not the product of effort. The truth comes to us by means of profound comprehension. We need effort to work in the great work, effort to transmute our creative energies, effort to live, struggle and tread the path of integral revolution, but we do not need effort to comprehend the truth. Psychological slavery. There is not the least doubt that we are on the verge of a third world conflagration, and that is why we have written this book titled The Revolution of the Dialectic. Times have changed, and we are initiating a new era within the august thundering of thought. A new revolutionary ethics based on a revolutionary psychology is now needed. Without an in-depth ethics, the best social and economic formulae remain reduced to dust. It is impossible for the individual to transform himself if he does not concern himself with the dissolution of the I. Psychological slavery destroys interaction. Psychological dependence on someone is slavery. If our manner of thinking, feeling and acting depends on the manner of thinking, feeling and acting of those persons who interact with us, then we are enslaved. We constantly receive letters from many people who are desirous of eliminating the I, but they complain about the wife, children, brother, family, husband, boss, etc. Those people demand conditions in order to dissolve the I. They want luxuries in order to annihilate the ego. They demand magnificent conduct from those with whom they interact. The funniest thing of all of this is that those poor people seek different subterfuges. They want to flee, abandon their home, their job, etc., supposedly to realize themselves in depth. Poor people, their adored torments are their bosses, naturally. These people have not yet learned to be free. Their conduct depends on the conduct of others. If we want to follow the path of chastity and aspire that our wife first be chaste, then we are failures already. If we want to cease being drunkards but we become embarrassed when we are offered a drink because of what others will say, or because our friends could become angry, then we will never cease to be drunkards. If we want to cease being angry, irascible, irate, furious, but as a prior condition we demand that those who interact with us be sweet and serene and that they do nothing that bothers us, then yes, we are failures because they are not saints, and at any moment, they will put an end to our good intentions. If we want to dissolve the I, we need to be free. The one who depends on the behavior of others will not be able to dissolve the I. Our conduct should be our own and should not depend on anyone. Our thoughts, feelings, and actions should flow independently from the inside towards the outside. The worst difficulties offer us the best opportunities. In the past, there existed many sages surrounded by all types of luxuries and without difficulties of any type. Those sages, wanting to annihilate the I, had to create difficult situations for themselves. In difficult situations, we have formidable opportunities to study our internal and external impulses, our thoughts, sentiments, actions, our reactions, volitions, etc. Interaction is a full-length mirror where we can see ourselves as we are and not as we apparently are. Interaction is a marvel. If we are properly attentive, we can discover at each instant our most secret defects. They flourish, leap out when we least expect it. We have known many persons who say, "I no longer have anger," and at the least provocation they thunder and flash like lightning. Others say, "I no longer have jealousy," but one smile from the spouse to any good neighbor is enough for their faces to be green with jealousy. People protest because of the difficulties that interaction offers them. They do not want to realize that those difficulties are providing them precisely the necessary opportunities for the dissolution of the I. Interaction is a formidable school. The book of that school is made up of many chapters. The book of that school is the I. We need to be really free if we really want to dissolve the I. The one who depends on the conduct of others is not free. Only the one who becomes truly free knows what love is. The slave does not know what true love is. If we are slaves of the thinking, feeling, and doing of others, we will never know what love is. Love is born in us when we put an end to psychological slavery. We need to comprehend very profoundly, and in all the areas of the mind, that entire complicated mechanism of psychological slavery. There are many forms of psychological slavery. It is necessary to study all those forms if we really want to dissolve the I. Psychological slavery exists not only internally but also externally. Intimate, secret, occult slavery exists which we do not even remotely suspect. The slave believes that he loves, when in reality he is only fearing. The slave does not know what true love is. The woman who fears her husband believes that she adores him when truly, she is only fearing him. The husband who fears his wife believes that he loves her when in reality what is happening is that he fears her. He may fear that she may leave with someone else, or that her character may become sour, or that she may deny him sexually, etc. The employee who fears the boss believes that he loves him, that he respects him, that he cares for his interests, etc. No psychological slave knows what love is. Psychological slavery is incompatible with love. There are two types of conduct. The first is the one which comes from the outside to the inside, and the second one is the one which goes from the inside to the outside. The first is the result of psychological slavery and is produced by reaction. We are hit, and we hit back. We are insulted, and we reply with insults. The second type of conduct is the best, that of one who is no longer a slave, that of one who no longer has anything to do with the thinking, feeling, and doing of the others. That type of conduct is independent, it is upright and just conduct. If we are hit, we answer with blessings. If we are insulted, we keep silent. If they want to get us drunk, we do not drink even when our friends become angry, etc. Now our readers will comprehend why psychological freedom brings that which is called love. The Kalkian personality. We have to become more and more conscious each time of the work that we are carrying out. It is fundamental to know the difference that exists between the Gnostic movement and all the other pseudo-esoteric and pseudo-occultist organizations that there are. Above all else, we have to know how to situate ourselves, how to center ourselves if we want to comprehend the work that we should carry out. If we take a general look at the different schools which presently exist in the world, all of a pseudo-esoteric and pseudo-occultist nature, we easily get to discover their origin. On one occasion, there occurred in Rome the case of a nun who constantly fell into a hypnotic trance. She had a confessor, and with him she had to clarify the causa causorum of those fatal trances. Before all else, the confessor managed to know that she had had a lover and that although she was cloistered, she kept a photograph of her lover. The confessor made her bring it, and suddenly he realized that by merely looking at that picture, she fell into a trance. That confessor resolved to be assessed by a psychologist, and they subjected the nun to psychic experiments. They were then able to evince that it was not the photograph of that man which put her in a trance state, but rather some very brilliant stones which were on the picture frame. The investigations continued, and very soon it was possible to conclude, as a consequence or corollary, that all types of brilliant objects predispose to hypnotic states. As a result, practically an entire school was derived. They were able to verify that by means of hypnotic states it would be possible to modify in some way the psychological states of patients, and it was thereby resolved to utilize hypnosis to cure patients or sick persons. This is how the famous medical hypnotists were born. It was then that many followers of hypnology, catalepsy, mediumship, etc. made their appearance in the world. It is not superfluous to remember Richard Charcot, Louis Uribe, Cesar Lombroso, Camille Flammarion, etc. with certain emphasis. In that school of hypnotists, the ones who especially stood out were an Englishman whose name I do not recall in these precise instants and the famous Charcot. As far as the former is concerned, he had all the properties of a Hannah's Mushin. The latter, referring to Charcot, there was no doubt that he was Mommy's baby. His experiments were noteworthy, but since he was the baby, the spoiled child of the family, everything that he did was a marvel. Well, if I mention all of these passages in a general manner, and experiments of magnetism, hypnology, catalepsy, spiritism, and 50,000 things of the sort, it is with a single purpose, to make you see where the different schools of a pseudo-esoteric and pseudo-occultist type of this dark age of Kali Yuga came from. In those times of the young ladies Fox de Mireville who managed to serve as instruments for the materialization of the famous Katie King, a phantom that lasted 3 consecutive years materializing herself before the eyes of different scientists of the entire world, in those days of Eusapia Palladino of Naples, in which all of Europe became agitated with psychic phenomena. This was when theosophism of an Oriental type appeared. And of course, you know it, everyone who has visited those organizations knows that in the aforementioned school there is always a mixture of spiritism with theories of a Hindu type. Theosophism has never been free of the spiritualistic phenomenon. When we know the origin of the different organizations which presently exist, it cannot surprise us in any way that theosophism is mixed with some mediumship. That theosophists become frightened before tantrism is normal because it is not a school of an esoteric type, but rather of a pseudo-occultist type and nothing more. Unquestionably, many branches or organizations, let's call them pseudo-Rosicrucianism, pseudo-yogism, etc., had to branch off, and they did so, as is natural, from that school of hypnotists. They are so innumerable that we would need to consult a dictionary to know all their names. But let us get to the bottom of this matter. What is the foundation of such schools? The dogma of evolution. Where did such touted dogma come from? From a Mr. Darwin. It seems incredible that Mr. Darwin has put into his pocket many eminent figures, many esoterist, pseudo-esoterist investigators, and many sincere aspirants. But that is how it happened, we cannot deny it. The concept about reincarnation which was created by pseudo-esoteric organizations in the Western world is false. Lord Krishna never said that all human beings reincarnated. He said that only the Buddhas, the gods, the solar heroes, had the right to reincarnation. The rest of us are subjected to the law of the eternal return of all things, that is clear. It was also never said in the Orient that all humanoid beings possessed the superior existential bodies of the being. But it was easy for the schools of a pseudo-esoteric and pseudo-occultist type to make humanity believe that the entire world already possesses such superior vehicles. In this manner, they have no inconvenience in talking about the subject, the septenary of man, with such certainty that it seems as if all humanoids truly possessed that entire set of vehicles. Well, the result of this species of morbidity, disseminated throughout the Western world, from these schools of a subjective, incoherent, vague and indefinite type has been the Kalkian personality, in other words, the personality that is characteristic of this age of Kali Yuga. Kalkian personalities are disrespectful, irreverent. This type of personality from pseudo-esoteric and pseudo-occultist schools have lost, not only the sense of authentic devotion and of true religiosity, but also that of veneration for the ancient patriarchs. In this manner, humanity, having been able to be directed by truly wise religions, has degenerated in its ridiculous pedantry, thus forming the Kalkian personality. It is convenient to know how to confront a Kalkian personality with an authentically esoterist personality. What is the difference? The Kalkian personality is full of pedantries. Bottled up in the dogma of evolution, misinformed about the internal constitution of man, he ignores the tantric mysteries, he fears the development of the igneous serpent in the spinal column, and besides, the fact of being stuffed with theories produces in him a feeling of self-sufficiency. Unquestionably, the Kalkian personality is a victim of self-deceit. He believes that he has achieved everything when he has achieved nothing, and what is worse is that he has lost the sense of veneration. He has forgotten the true and authentic religiosity. He has also lost humility before the creating logos. This is the Kalkian personality. We cannot walk on the path of the Kalkian personality. We cannot accept those false dogmas such as evolution, such as that of believing that all humanoids are perfect, complete men with their existential bodies, such as fearing the igneous serpent of our magical powers and the lived experience, etc. We prefer instead to follow the path of authentic wisdom, the path of the tantras, that of the dissolution of the ego, and that of the recognition of our own misery and incapacity. We prefer to recognize that we are nothing, that we are only miserable worms in the mud. We are concerned, yes, to work in ourselves, upon ourselves. We want the dissolution of our myself, of the one-self. We use the intelligent power of the creative energy. We work in the forge of the Cyclops, which frightens pseudo-esoterists and pseudo-occultists so much. We are, therefore, on a different, 100% revolutionary path, and which nonetheless has a frightening antiquity which is lost in the unbearable night of all ages. Certainly, the characteristics of the Kalkian personality are unmistakable. Before everything else, the self-sufficiency and the terrible pride and the frightening vanity based on theories. We see, for example, in the schools of psychoanalysis, parapsycho, etc., what terrible pride and self-sufficiency seize those people with true Kalkian personalities. They stand out not only in certain groups, but they also appear on television. They appear in the press, on radio, and have the entire world completely poisoned with a type of vibrations which in esotericism is called venenio-Scyrian. They have complete self-sufficiency. They look at the people of the Middle Ages with disdain. They think that they are super-civilized. They believe that they have arrived at the non-plus-ultra of wisdom. Such is their pride that they plan to conquer the infinite, outer space. They laugh at what they consider to be superstitions of the medieval sages. There you have the subject with a Kalkian personality. And how does one make those Kalkian personalities comprehend that they are mistaken? It would not be sufficient to simply tell them, for they will deny it. Isn't that true? Since those Kalkian personalities have mastery over reasoning, and that is their combat weapon, their little battle horse, well, we have to lead them to comprehend what the reasoning process is. We have to make those self-sufficient and proud people know that Immanuel Kant, the philosopher of Königsberg, the great German thinker, wrote a book called The Critique of Pure Reason, as well as The Critique of Practical Reason. If we study Immanuel Kant, we will see how he deciphers us, not only in his persyllogisms, episyllogisms, and syllogisms, but also in the manner how he analyzes the concepts of contents in The Critique of Pure Reason. It is clear that through external sensory perceptions we inform the mind, then, the latter elaborates its concepts of contents based, precisely, on the rustic sensorial connections, and because of that, it is circumscribed only by the data provided by the senses. Therefore, what can the subjective reason know about intuitions, and about ideas a priori, and about that which escapes the concepts of contents based only on external sensory perceptions? Nothing. Isn't that so? There exists another type of reason which the Kalkian personality absolutely ignores. I wish to emphatically refer to objective reason. Obviously, the latter has as its foundation the data of the conscience, and it is with such data with which it functions. In authentic esotericism, the conscience is called zoostat. Objective reason was developed before the Greco-Roman period emerged. The primitive Aryans of the first subrace of the great Aryan race, which flourished in Central Asia, had it developed. The people of the second subrace, prior to the period of the solar rishis, possessed it. The Egyptians of the ancient dynasties of the pharaohs, the Babylonians. The sages of Afghanistan, Turkestan, and Iraq also used it and concluded, practically, with Greek reasoning. The Greeks were the ones who, beginning to play with words, ended up by establishing the subjective reason based on external sensory perceptions, drowning the objective reason, eliminating it from the face of the earth. Ever since then, humanity only possesses the subjective reason, external sensory perceptions, the data provided by the senses. The concepts of contents are based on the sensorial connections, etc. And subjective reason can know nothing about that which escapes the aforementioned factors. The sensualistic subjective reason can know nothing about what is real, the divine, about the mysteries of life and death, etc. It is completely ignorant of all that which escapes its sphere of action, the five deficient senses. Unquestionably, the powers of the heart exist, those qualities which are much beyond the intellect and its purely reasoning process, and which the sensualistic subjective reason knows nothing of. In the sacred land of the Vedas there is an old manuscript which says the following. The one who meditates on the heart center will achieve control over the Vayu Tattva, the etheric principle of air, and will also acquire the siddhis, the powers of the saints. In these moments there comes to my memory the case of Joseph of Cupertino. They say that he elevated himself into the air 70 times, and this magical occurrence, which happened around 1650, was the reason why he was canonized. It is indubitable that he had the heart center developed. When a cardinal interrogated him, he told him, "Well, why is it that you clamor at the moment that you are going to rise while in prayer?" He then answered, "The gunpowder, when ignited in the harquebus, explodes with a great noise. The same thing occurs to the heart which is inflamed by divine love." So, in a practical manner, Joseph of Cupertino gave the clue of the jinn state. The heart is what we have to develop in order to be able to achieve the jinn states. Christina, the extraordinary saint, constantly levitated. Once dead, it was believed that she was dead. They were going to bury her, and suddenly, from within the coffin, she arose, floating all the way to the bell tower of the church. We could continue narrating innumerable cases. Surely, that of Francis of Assisi, the good brother who took care of him brought him food, and the monk was already in levitation, floating in the atmosphere. On other occasions, the good brother could not manage to give him the food because he could not reach him. Francis of Assisi was already too high, to such a degree that sometimes he would disappear into a grove nearby. Poor Mesmer, he was ridiculed very much in his time, and they continue ridiculing him. Criticism was raised against him, and they still continue criticizing him in the present. Many texts of hypnotism begin by talking against Mesmer. Hypnotists hate him because he precisely pronounced himself against that false conscience. He discovered that a double conscience existed, the false and the true conscience. Mesmer came to unmask the false conscience before the solemn verdict of public opinion, and it is clear that they almost swallowed him. That is the crude reality of facts. Well, in order to not deviate so much from the subject, what I want to say is that inner development is only achieved by endeavoring to throw the false conscience into the trash and pay attention to the true conscience, the authentic conscience. What is understood by false conscience? That which they have formed for us from the time we were born, that which was created with examples, with the precepts of all of our relatives, that which they formed for us in school, in secondary school, etc., that which was formed with all the social prejudices that exist and shall exist. We have to throw all of that into the bottom of the trash and cause the true conscience to come to the surface in order for it to work. This indicates that one must become a child in order to work, to become an infant, a baby, at the moment of working, stripped of theories and putting the true wisdom into play. In this manner, therefore, I have written this chapter with the purpose that we may center ourselves, that we recognize the situation in which we are in this world, that we understand that we do not march on the path of all the little schools, sects and orders which form the Chalcyon personality, that we are different. That is all. Contumacy. Contumacy is the insistence of pointing out an error, and that is why I will never become tired of insisting that the cause of all errors is the ego. The myself. I do not care if the intellectual animals become upset because I speak against the ego. No matter what, I will continue with contumacy. 2 great world wars have passed, and the world is on the verge of a 3rd world war. The world is in crisis. There is misery, illnesses, and ignorance everywhere. The 2 world wars have not left us anything good. The First World War left us the terrible influenza, which killed millions of persons in the year 1918. The Second World War left us a mental pest, which is worse than the pest of the First World War. We are referring to the abominable existentialist philosophy which has totally poisoned the new generations, and against which the revolution of the dialectic proclaims itself. All of us have created this social chaos in which we live, and all of us together should work to dissolve it and make it a better world by means of the teachings which I deliver in this work. Unfortunately, people only think of their egotistical I and say, I am first, I am second, and I am third. We have already said it, and we repeat it once more. The ego sabotages the orders which revolutionary psychology establishes. If we truly and very sincerely want the revolution of the dialectic, we first need the radical transformation of the individual. Many are the persons who accept the need for a radical, total, and definitive interior change, but unfortunately, they demand stimuli and special incentives. People like to hear that they are doing well, that they be given pats on the shoulder, that they be told stimulating words, etc. Many are the persons who demand some beautiful verse that will serve them as an inducement, some belief, some ideology, or any utopia in order to change. There are those who demand the promise of a good job as an inducement to change. There are those who demand a good courtship or a magnificent marriage that will serve them as an inducement to change. Nobody wants to change just like that, but they do want a good incentive for action. People enjoy stimuli. Poor people do not want to comprehend that such stimuli are empty and superficial, and that, therefore, it is but logical that they are useless. Stimuli have never in life, never in the history of the centuries, been able to provoke a radical, total, and definitive radical change within any individual. Within every person exists an energetic center that cannot be destroyed with the death of the physical body, and which perpetuates itself, for the misfortune of the world, in our descendants. That center is the I, the myself, the oneself. We need with maximum, undelayable urgency to produce a radical change within that energetic center called the I. Pats on the shoulder, beautiful words, beautiful flattery, beautiful stimuli, noble inducements, etc., will never be able to produce any radical change in that energetic center called the I which is within us. If we sincerely and wholeheartedly want a radical change within that center called the I, we have to recognize our lamentable state of misery and interior poverty and forget ourselves in order to work disinterestedly for humanity. This means abnegation, complete forgetting of oneself and complete abandonment of oneself. It is impossible for there to be a radical change within ourselves if we only think of filling our pockets with money and more money. The I, the myself, wants to grow, improve, evolve, interact with the great people on earth, to acquire influence, position, wealth, etc. Superficial changes in our person are useless. They do not change anything and do not transform anyone or anything. We need a profound change within each of us. Such a change can only be carried out within the center that we carry within the I. Like a potter's cup, we need to break the egotistical center. It is urgent to extirpate the I in order to produce a profound, radical, total, and definitive change within each of us. In the state that we are in, we can only serve to make our lives bitter and to make our fellow men's lives bitter. The I wants to fill itself with honors, virtues, money, etc. The I wants pleasures, fame, prestige, etc., and in its crazy eagerness to extend itself, it creates an egotistical society in which there are only disputes, cruelties, insatiable covetousness, limitless and borderless ambition, wars, etc. To our misfortune, we are members of a society created by the I. Such a society is useless, harmful, and deleterious. It is only by radically extirpating the I that we can integrally change and change the world. If we truly want the radical extirpation of the I, it is urgent to have the memory still, in order for the mind to become serene, and then observe ourselves calmly in order to know ourselves. We should contemplate ourselves like someone who is contemplating and enduring on himself a torrential rain. No one in life can dissolve the I by seeking substitutes, leaving liquor behind and replacing it with the cigarette, abandoning a woman to marry another, leaving a defect to replace it with another, or leaving a school for another school. If we truly want a radical change within ourselves, we should set aside all those things which appear positive to us, all those old habits and all those mistaken customs. The mind is the central headquarters of the I. We need a change in the central headquarters in order for there to be true revolution within each of us. It is only with absolute abnegation and comprehension of what we unfortunately are, and without stimuli or incentives of any type, that we truly achieve the extirpation of the I. The states of the ego. The states of the ego are classified in the following manner. Stereopsychic are the identifying states which are intimately related with the exterior perceptions which are received through the five senses, and which are connected with the world of impressions. Neopsychic are the data processing states, in other words, those which properly interpret or misinterpret all the multiple situations which the intellectual animal lives. Our bad secretary, the personality, works in these states. Archaeopsychic are the regressive states memory of the ego which are found in the 49 levels of the subconscious. They are the memories of the past which are filed in a photographic and phonographic manner. Blue time or rest therapeutics. On the mysterious threshold of the Temple of Delphi, there was a Greek maxim inscribed on living stone which read Noste ipsum, man. Know thyself and thou shalt know the universe and the gods. It is obvious that in the last instant, the study of oneself, serene reflection, concludes in the stillness and silence of the mind. When the mind is still and in silence, not only on a superficial, intellectual level, but also in each and all of the 49 subconscious departments, then comes the novel, the essence, the consciousness becomes unbottled, and the awakening of the soul, ecstasy, and samadhi comes. The daily practice of meditation radically transforms us. People who do not work on the annihilation of the I live like butterflies going from school to school and do not find their permanent center of gravity. They die as failures without having attained the inner self-realization of the being. The awakening of consciousness is only possible through liberation and emancipation from mental dualism, from the battle of the antitheses, from intellectual waves. Any subconscious, infraconscious, or unconscious struggle becomes an impediment to the liberation of the essence. Every antithetical battle, no matter how insignificant or unconscious it might be, indicates unknown obscure points in the atomic infernos of man. In order to achieve the absolute stillness and silence of the mind, it is indispensable to observe and to know those infrahuman aspects of oneself. It is only in the absence of the I that it is possible to experience and live the integral revolution and the revolution of the dialectic. Blue time or rest therapeutics has basic rules without which it would be impossible to emancipate ourselves from the mortifying shackles of the mind. These rules are: 1. Relaxation. It is indispensable to learn to relax the body for meditation. No muscle should remain in tension. It is urgent to provoke and graduate sleepiness at will. It is evident that the wise combination of sleepiness and meditation results in that which is called illumination. 2. Retrospection. What are we looking for in retrospection? Due to the mechanical life that he lives in, the intellectual animal forgets himself and falls into fascination. He goes around with an asleep consciousness without remembering what he did at the moment of rising, without knowing the first thoughts of the day, his actions, and the places he has been to. Retrospection has as objective the acquisition of awareness of one's behavior or actions of the past. On carrying out the retrospection, we will not put any objections to the mind. We will recall memories of past actions, from the moment of beginning the retrospection to the moment of our lives that we desire. We should study each memory without becoming identified with it. 3. Serene reflection. First, we need to become fully aware of the mood that we are in, before any thought surges. Serenely observe our mind. Pay full attention to any mental form which appears on the screen of the intellect. It is necessary to become sentries of our own mind during any agitated activity and to stop for an instant to observe it. 4. Psychoanalysis. Investigate, inquire, find out the origin of each thought, memory, affection, emotion, sentiment, resentment, etc. as they surge in the mind. During psychoanalysis, one should examine, evaluate, and inquire about the origin, cause, reason, or fundamental motive of each thought, memory, image, and association, as they surge from the bottom of the subconscious. 5. Mantralization or koan. The objectives of this phase are: A. To mix the magical forces of mantrams or koans in our inner universe. B. To awaken the consciousness. C. To accumulate Christi atoms of high voltage within. In this psychological work, the intellect should take upon itself a receptive, integral, unitotal, full, tranquil, and profound state. One achieves the unitotal receptive state with the koans or phrases that decontrol the mind. 6. Superlative analysis consists of an introspective knowledge of oneself. During deep meditation, introversion is indispensable. In that state, one will work in the process of the comprehension of the I or defect that one wants to disintegrate. The Gnostic student will concentrate himself on the psychological aggregate and will maintain it on the screen of the mind. Above all, it is indispensable to be sincere with oneself. Superlative analysis consists of two phases, which are: A. Self-Explorer 1 Ion. To investigate, in the depth of our consciousness and in the 49 levels of the subconscious, when it was that the defect first manifested itself in our lives, when it last manifested itself, and in what moments it is that it has more strength to manifest itself. B. Self-Discovery. To investigate what the foods of the I are. To fraction and divide the defect in various parts and to study each part to get to know the kind of I it originates from and the kind of I that originate from it. 7. Self-Judgment. To seat the defect being studied on the defendant's bench. To bring to judgment the damages it causes the consciousness and the benefits that the annihilation of the defect being judged would bring into our life. 8. Prayer. One will ask the Divine Mother Kundalini, our inner and individual Mother, with much fervor. One will talk to her with frankness and introverting all the defects and faults we have, so that she, who is the only one capable of disintegrating the egos, will disintegrate them from their very root. It is pleasant and interesting to attend the meditation halls, Gnostic sanctuaries, every time one is able to do so. It is essential to always practice meditation with closed eyes so as to avoid external sensory perceptions. The corpses of the ego. In the atomic infernos, one has to disintegrate the corpses of the ego by dint of the sexual electric force. One must not wait for time to disintegrate them. The precious diamond with which Solomon polished the precious stones is the philosopher's stone. Upon disintegrating the corpses of the ego, we should direct all of our efforts to not creating physical bodies once again, because they are vulnerable and exposed to aging and death. Indubitably, karma creates bodies. Due to the lack of psychological work, people of today are not profound, and they like being superficial. They believe themselves capable of laughing at all civilizations. Presently, the human mind is degenerated due to the matter of concepts. Every concept that is emitted is the result of what others have said, of what has been studied. Self-concept is based on the experience of one's own form of thinking. Gurdjieff is incipient in his teachings. Krishnamurti does have self-concepts because he has never read anything from anyone. Imbalance and rupture with the harmony of the cosmos occurs when self-authority is not possessed within. How will one possess self-authority if one is not lord of oneself? Self-action can only be possible when one has the being within. The philosopher's stone, self-concept, self-action, and self-authority are only possible when one disintegrates the corpses of the ego in the psychological atomic infernos. Psychogenesis. Our civilization, apparently so brilliant due to the conquest of space and the penetration of matter, is rotten due to the leprosy of a decadent ethics of homosexuality, lesbianism, and drug addiction. This civilization has entered the phase of involution to liquidate itself, as has occurred with other civilizations. The historical testimony of the proud and imperial Rome, where the signs of involution surged forth when the greatness of an austere and moral nation suffered radical changes which sunk it into vices, having been a conquering community of the old world, shows it to us. On what do I base myself? On clear and conclusive facts. A great culture such as that of the English now only exports a psychological leprosy which mentally contaminates the generations of these times. The English group, the Sex Pistols, who are capable of doing everything that is contrary to what is established, but negatively, to appear as outstanding figures, are the creators of punk rock and fabricators of songs which are plagued with bad words, themes which they employ for direct attack, not only against institutions, but also against the public itself that listens with an asleep consciousness. Filth is the flag of the Sex Pistols, a subjective message which they deliver to this poor humanity which is rotten to the core. The Sex Pistols is an aggressive group. It commits abuses against everything that is pointed out by the punk rock religion. Songs against love, full of cynicism, against repression and aggression, created by 4 young people of the English working class who are against elitism. It is absurd for these intellectual animals to be able to create a religion forgetting that the word religion comes from the Greek, religor, which means union with the divinity. But what type of divinity do these degenerated people have which young people adore in their hypnosis, as if it was something great? That musical current shown by the Sex Pistols creates the most infernal atmosphere in present existence. This is confirmed by hundreds of young people sunk in the most profound spiritual and psychological ignorance who participate in those editions of the 100 Club in London. The punk wave advances in spite of opposition, and the subjective fashion already appears in innumerable international magazines. Clothes cut into strips, discarded pieces of any existent materials that they employ as adornment, short hair dyed with many colors, shirts and t-shirts with legends against everything. This is a clear demonstration of the symptoms of the psychological leprosy which humanity has and which has it so rotten. In many of their encounters, physical aggressiveness anger is a habit. With enormous ease, insults are uttered and even bottles are flung from the very stage of the Sex Pistols, which often leads to brawls, and from there, this even leads to jail and even the hospitals. With all of this insulting verbiage and flinging of objects appear hundreds of English young people yelling that they love the Sex Pistols because they are the maximum, as it has already occurred in some editions of the Paradise Club on Brewer Street. Curiously, the Sex Pistols band is led by Johnny Rotten, the leader who never sung before, Sid Vicious, Paul Cook and Steve Jones. They do not respect anyone in England, and it would be very difficult for them to come to our country. I consider that life could not be explained without periodic evolutions and involutions such as that of the punk wave, which is noticed in plants, animals, human beings, in stars, and in constellations. Historical cycles also have an evolution and then the involution which fatally presents itself, which wears out rocks, pulverizes suns, transforms someone who was once a boy into an old man, converts the tree into coal and sinks continents into the depth of the oceans, or causes them to emerge. Our postulates presented in this work seek to establish the foundations of a new civilization which will not have leprosy and will base itself on psychogenesis, in other words, on the creation of man first of all, to then move on to the superman through mental and sexual superdynamics which we have been emphasizing in this book. All those who wish to do so can enter our Gnostic institutions which disseminate my teachings, as long as they have aspirations to improve and to carry out the psychogenesis within themselves, here and now. The man who has not carried out the psychogenesis within himself only uses an infinitely small part of his capacities and potential. That is why I invite our readers to practice the psychological teachings which I deliver in these chapters in order for them to learn to obtain the maximum yield from their psyche. Within every human being exist infinite possibilities for a knowledge which is also limitless. We all possess in an embryonic stage great psychological faculty which will surge forth at the very moment that we initiate the work of carrying out a psychogenesis in ourselves without waiting one more instant. The human being should prepare himself to know everything that concerns his existence. This is a fact that is as natural as free will. Why are we here? Where did we come from? Where are we going? All of this should be known here and remain free of dogmas and theories. By means of the psychological disciplines that I have been indicating, we will be able to improve psychically, in other words, to carry out the psychogenesis in ourselves in order to place ourselves in contact with the different dimensions of nature. As we work on our psychogenesis, we will be seeing our own individual improvement, thus, having access to the profound esoteric teachings which throughout the course of the countless centuries have been there, at the disposal of every human being who sincerely yearns to find an answer to a number of voids and questions, and which without knowing it, answer the immortal suggestion of the great master, seek and thou shalt find. In synthesis, we will say that psychogenesis is based on the phrase inscribed on the ancient temple of Delphi. I warn you, whoever you are, oh, you who wish to probe the arcane of nature, if you do not find within yourself that which you seek, neither shall you be able to find it outside. If you ignore the excellencies of your own house, how do you intend to find other excellencies? In you is hidden the treasure of treasures. Oh, man, know yourself, and you shall know the universe and the gods. The transformation of impressions. We are going to talk about the transformation of life, and this is possible if one profoundly resolves it unto oneself. Transformation means that one thing changes into another different thing. It is logical that everything is susceptible to changes. Transformations exist which are well known in matter. No one could deny, for example, that sugar is transformed into alcohol arid, that the latter is converted into vinegar by means of the action of fermentation. This is the transformation of a molecular substance. One knows about the chemical life of the elements. For example, radium is slowly transformed into lead. The alchemists of the Middle Ages spoke about the transmutation of lead into gold. However, they did not always refer to the mere metallic physical matter. Normally, they wanted to indicate with such a word the transmutation of the lead of the personality into the gold of the spirit. Therefore, it is convenient for us to reflect on all of these things. In the Gospels, the idea of the terrestrial man, the latter comparable to a seed that is capable of growth, has the same meaning as the idea of the rebirth of the man who is born once again. It is obvious that if the grain does not die, the plant is not born. Death and birth exists in every transformation. In Gnosis, we consider man to be like a factory of 3 floors, which normally absorbs 3 foods. Ordinary food corresponds to the inferior floor of the factory, is a matter of the stomach. Air, which is naturally in relation with the second floor, corresponds to the lungs, and impressions, which indubitably are associated with the third floor or cerebrum. The food which we eat suffers successive transformations. This is unquestionable. The process of life, in itself and by itself, is transformation. Each creature of the universe lives by means of the transformation of one substance into another. The plant, for example, transforms water, the air and salts of the earth into new vital vegetable substances, into elements which are useful to us, such as nuts, fruits, potatoes, lemons, etc. Therefore, everything is transformation. By the action of solar light, the ferments of nature vary. It is unquestionable that the sensitive film of life, which normally extends over the face of the earth, leads every universal force towards the very interior of the planetary world. But each plant, each insect, each creature, and the intellectual animal himself, mistakenly called man, absorbs, assimilates specific cosmic energies and then transforms as well as unconsciously transmits them to the inferior layers of the planetary organism. Such transformed energies are intimately related with the whole economy of the planetary organism in which we live. Indubitably, every creature, according to its species, transforms specific energies which it then transmits into the interior of the earth for the economy of the world. Therefore, each creature that has existence fulfills the same functions. When we eat a food necessary for our existence, the latter is transformed. It is clear from one phase to another. The plant, for example, transforms water, the air and salts of the earth into new vital vegetable substances, into elements which are useful to us, such as nuts, fruits, potatoes, lemons, etc. Therefore, everything is transformation. By the action of solar light, the ferments of nature vary. It is unquestionable that the sensitive film of life, which normally extends over the face of the earth, leads every universal force towards the very interior of the planetary world. But each plant, each insect, each creature, and the intellectual animal himself, mistakenly called man, absorbs, assimilates specific cosmic energies and then transforms as well as unconsciously transmits them to the inferior layers of the planetary organism. Such transformed energies are intimately related with the whole economy of the planetary organism in which we live. Indubitably, every creature, according to its species, transforms specific energies which it then transmits into the interior of the earth for the economy of the world. Therefore, each creature that has existence fulfills the same functions. When we eat a food necessary for our existence, the latter is transformed. It is clear from one phase to another, into all of those elements which are so indispensable for our existence. Who carries out those processes of the transformation of substances within us? Obviously, the instinctive center. The wisdom of this center is really astonishing. Digestion, in itself, is transformation. The food in the stomach, in other words, in the inferior part of this three-story factory of the human organism, suffers transformation. If something was to enter without going through the stomach, the organism would neither be able to assimilate its vitaminic principles nor its proteins. That would simply be an indigestion. As we reflect upon this subject, we get to comprehend the necessity of undergoing a transformation. It is clear that physical foods are transformed, but there is something which invites us to reflection. Does an educated transformation of impressions exist within us? For the purpose of nature itself, there is no need whatsoever for the intellectual animal, mistakenly called man, to really transform impressions. But a man can transform his impressions by himself, by possessing, naturally, an in-depth knowledge, we would say. And he has to comprehend the reason for that necessity. It is magnificent to transform impressions. The majority of people, as seen in the field of practical life, believe that this physical world will give them what they yearn for and seek. Really, this is a tremendous error. Life, in itself, enters in us, into our organism, in the form of mere impressions. The first thing that we should comprehend is the significance of the esoteric work intimately related with the world of impressions. That we need to transform them? That is true. One could not really transform one's life unless one transforms the impressions, which reach the mind. The persons who read these lines should reflect on what is being said here. We are talking about something very revolutionary, for the entire world believes that the physical is what is real, but if we go a little deeper, we see that what we are really receiving at each instant, at each moment, are mere impressions. If we see a person that pleases or displeases us, the first thing that we obtain are impressions of that nature. Isn't that true? This we cannot deny. Life is a succession of impressions, and not as is believed by the learned ignoramuses, a physical thing of an exclusively materialistic type. The reality of life are its impressions. It is clear that the ideas that we are emitting are not very easy to grasp, to apprehend. It is possible that readers have the certainty that life exists as such and not as its impressions. They are so influenced by this physical world that, obviously, that is how they think the person that we see seated. For example, on a chair, there, with this or that colored suit. The one who greets us, the one who smiles at us, etc., are for us really true. But if we meditate profoundly on all of them, we arrive at the conclusion that what is real are the impressions. The latter arrive, naturally, at the mind through the windows of the senses. If we did not have senses, for example, eyes to see, ears to hear, mouth to taste the foods which the organism ingests, would what is called the physical world exist for us? Of course not, absolutely not. Life reaches us in the form of impressions, and it is there, precisely, where the possibility of working upon ourselves exists. Before all else, what should we do? We have to comprehend the work that we should do. How could we achieve a psychological transformation of ourselves? Well, by carrying out a work upon the impressions that we are receiving at each instant, at each moment. This first work receives the name of first conscious shock. This is related with these impressions, which is everything that we know of the exterior world. What size do true things, true persons have? We need to transform ourselves internally each day. Upon wanting to transform our psychological aspect, we need to work upon the impressions which enter into us. Why do we call the work of the transformation of impressions the first conscious shock? Because the shock is something that we could not observe in a merely mechanical manner. This could never be done in a mechanical manner. One needs an auto-conscious effort. It is clear that when one begins to comprehend this work, one begins to cease being the mechanical man that serves the purposes of nature. If you now think about the significance of everything that you are taught here, by means of your own efforts, beginning with the observation of oneself, you will see that on the practical side of the esoteric work everything is intimately related with the transformation of impressions and with what naturally results from them. The work, for example, on negative emotions, on angry states, on identification, on self-consideration, on the successive I, on lying, on self-justification, on excuses, on the unconscious states in which we are, is all related with the transformation of impressions and what results from all of it. It will be convenient that, in a certain manner, the work upon oneself be compared to dissection, in the sense of what a transformation is. It is necessary to form an element of change at the place of entry of impressions. Do not forget it. By means of the comprehension of the work, you can accept life as work will then really enter a constant state of self-remembering. The terrible realism of the transformation of impression will naturally reach you. The impressions themselves, normally or supernormally better said, would lead you to a better life as far as you are concerned naturally, and they would no longer act upon all of you as they did at the beginning of your own transformation. But as long as you continue thinking in the same manner, receiving life in the same manner, it is clear that there will be no change in you. To transform the impressions of life is to transform oneself. This totally new manner of thinking helps us to carry out such a transformation. This entire discourse is exclusively based on the radical manner of transforming ourselves. If one does not transform oneself, nothing is achieved. You will comprehend, naturally, that life continuously demands that we react. All of those reactions form our personal life. To change one's life is to really change our own reactions. Exterior life reaches us as mere impressions which incessantly force us to react, we would say, in a stereotyped manner. If the reactions which form our personal life are all of a negative type, then our own life will be negative also. Life consists of a successive series of negative reactions which happen as incessant responses to the impressions which reach the mind. Therefore, our task consists in transforming the impressions of life in such a manner that they do not provoke this type of negative response. But in order to achieve it, it is necessary to be observing oneself from instant to instant, from moment to moment. It is urgent, therefore, to be studying our own impressions. One cannot allow impressions to reach us in a subjective and mechanical manner. If we begin with such control, this is equivalent to beginning life, to beginning to live more consciously. An individual can give himself the luxury of impressions not reaching him mechanically. Upon acting in this manner, he transforms impressions and then, he begins to live consciously. The first conscious shock consists in transforming the impressions which reach us. If one manages to transform the impressions which reach the mind at the moment of entry, one obtains marvelous results which benefit our existence. One can still work on the result of the impressions. It is clear that they expire without mechanical effect, since this mechanicity is usually disastrous in the interior of our psyche. This Gnostic esoteric work should be taken to the point where the impressions enter, because they are mechanically distributed to wrong places by the personality to evoke old reactions. I will try to simplify this. As an example, let us use the following. If we throw a stone into a crystalline lake, impressions are produced in the lake, and the response of those impressions produced by the stone manifest in the form of waves which go from the center to the periphery. Now, imagine the mind as a lake. Suddenly, an image of a person appears. That image is like the stone of our example, which reaches the mind. Then, the mind reacts in the form of impressions. The impressions are those which the image that reaches the mind produces, and the reactions are the responses to such impressions. If a ball is thrown against a wall, the wall receives the impressions, then follows the reaction, which consists of the return of the ball to the one who sent it. Well, it could be that it will return directly to the person, but by all means the ball bounces back, and that is reaction. The world is formed by impressions. For example, the image reaches our mind through the senses. We cannot say that the table has arrived or that the table has entered our cerebrum. That is absurd, but the image of the table is inside. Then our mind reacts immediately saying, "This is a wooden or metal table," etc. There are impressions which are not so pleasant. For example, the words of an offender. Isn't that so? Could we transform the words of an offender? Words are as they are, therefore, what could we do? Transform the impressions which such words produce in us, and this is possible. The Gnostic teaching teaches us how to crystallize the second force, the Christ in us, through the postulate which says, one has to receive with gladness the unpleasant manifestations of our fellow men. In the previous postulate is found the way to transform the impressions which the words of an offender produce in us. Receive with gladness the unpleasant manifestations of our fellow men. This postulate will naturally lead us to the crystallization of the second force, the Christ in us. It will cause the Christ to come and take shape in us. If of the physical world, we only know the impressions, then, in reality, the physical world is not so external as people believe. With just reason Immanuel Kant said, the exterior is the interior. If the interior is what matters, we should therefore transform the interior. The impressions are interior, therefore, all objects and things, everything that we see, exists in our interior in the form of impressions. If we do not transform impressions, nothing will change in us. Lust, covetousness, pride, hatred, etc., exist in the form of impressions within our psyche which vibrates incessantly. The mechanical result of such impressions have been all of those inhuman elements which we carry within and which we have normally called I, which in their mass constitute the myself, the one self. Let us suppose, for example, that an individual sees a provocative woman and that he does not transform those impressions. The result will be that the same impressions, of a lustful type, produce in him the desire of possessing her. Such a desire is the result of the impression received, and it crystallizes. It takes shape in our psyche and becomes one more aggregate, in other words, an inhuman element, a new type of lustful I which comes to add itself to the sum of inhuman elements which in their totality constitute the ego. Anger, covetousness, lust, envy, pride, laziness, and gluttony exist in us. Why anger? Because many impressions reached us, are interior, and we never transformed them. The mechanical result of such impressions of anger form the egos which exist and vibrate in our psyche and which constantly make us feel anger. Why covetousness? Indubitably, many things awakened covetousness in us: money, jewels, material things of all types, etc. Those things, those objects, reached us in the form of impressions. We committed the error of not having transformed these impressions into different things, into an attraction for beauty, into happiness, etc. Such non-transformed impressions naturally became I of covetousness, which we now carry in our interior. Why lust? I already said that different forms of lust reached us in the form of impressions. In other words, there surged in the interior of our mind images of an erotic type whose reaction was lust. Since we did not transform those lustful waves, that unhealthy eroticism, naturally the result did not make itself wait. New morbid egos were born in our psyche. Therefore, today we have to work on the impressions which we may have in our interior and on its mechanical results. Within, we have impressions of anger, covetousness, gluttony, pride, laziness, and lust. We also have within, the mechanical results of such impressions, a bunch of quarrelsome and vociferous I which we now need to comprehend and eliminate. Such work of our life consists in knowing how to transform impressions, and also in knowing how to eliminate the mechanical results of impressions which were not transformed in the past. The exterior world as such does not exist. What exist are impressions, and impressions are interior, and the reactions of such impressions are completely interior. No one could say that he is seeing a tree in itself. He may be seeing the image of a tree, but not the tree. The thing in it, as Immanuel Kant said, is not seen by anyone, one sees the image of things, in other words. The impression of a tree, of a thing, surge in us, and these impressions are internal, they are of the mind. If one does not carry out one's own internal modifications, the result will not make itself wait. The birth of new I is produced which come to enslave our essence, our consciousness, even more, which come to greater intensify the sleep in which we live. When one really comprehends all that exists within oneself with relation to the physical world, that they are nothing but impressions, one also comprehends the necessity of transforming those impressions, and upon doing it, the transformation of oneself is produced. There is nothing that hurts more than calumny or the words of an offender. If one is capable of transforming the impressions which such words produce in us, well, they then remain without any value. In other words, they remain like a check drawn against insufficient funds. Certainly, the words of an insulter do not have any more value than that which the insulted person gives them. Therefore, if the insulted person does not give them any importance, I repeat, they remain like a check drawn against insufficient funds. When one comprehends this, one then transforms the impressions of such words, for example, into something different, into love, into compassion for the insulter, and this, naturally, means transformation. Therefore, we need to be incessantly transforming impressions, not only the present ones, but also the past and the future ones. Within us exist many impressions with which we committed the error of not having transformed them in the past, and many mechanical results of the same impressions which are the so-called I which we now have to disintegrate, annihilate, in order for the consciousness to remain free and awake. It is indispensable to reflect on what I am saying. Things, persons, are nothing but impressions within us, within our minds. If we transform those impressions, we transform our life radically. For example, when there is pride in one, the latter has ignorance as its basis. For a person, for example, to feel proud of his social position, of his money. But if this person, for example, thinks that his social position is a mere mental matter, that it is a series of impressions which have reached his mind, impressions about his social status, when he thinks that such status is nothing but a mental matter, or when he analyzes the question of his worth, he comes to realize that his position exists in his mind in the form of impressions. Those impressions which money and social position produce are nothing but the external impressions of the mind. With the simple fact of comprehending that they are only impressions of the mind, there is transformation of the same. Then, pride, by itself, declines, collapses, and humility are born in us in a natural manner. Continuing the study of the processes of the transformation of impressions, I will proceed with something else. For example, the image of a lustful woman reaches the mind or surges in the mind. Such an image is an impression. That is obvious. We could transform that lustful impression through comprehension. It would be enough, in that instant, for us to think that that woman will one day die and that her body will become dust in the cemetery, and if with the imagination we saw her body in the process of disintegration in the grave, this would be more than sufficient to transform that lustful impression into chastity. If it is not transformed, it will be added to the other eye of lust. By means of comprehension, it is convenient that we transform the impressions which emerge in the mind. It is highly logical that the exterior world is not so exterior as is normally believed. Everything that reaches us from the world is interior because they are nothing but internal impressions. No one could put a tree, a chair, a palace, or a rock into his mind. Everything reaches our mind in the form of impressions, that is all, the impressions from a world which we call exterior, and which is really not exterior as it is believed. It is undeniable that we transform impressions through comprehension. If someone greets us, praises us, how could we transform the vanity which this or that flatterer could provoke in us? Obviously, the praises, the flattery are nothing but impressions which reach our mind, and the latter reacts in the form of vanity. But if those impressions are transformed, vanity becomes impossible. How could the words of a flatterer be transformed? By means of comprehension. When one really comprehends that one is nothing but an infinitesimal creature in a corner of the universe, one immediately transforms by oneself those impressions of praise, flattery, into something different. One converts such impressions into what they are, dust, cosmic dust, because one comprehends one's own position. We know that the galaxy in which we live is made up of millions of worlds. What is the Earth? It is a particle of dust in the infinite. And if we were to say that we are some organic microorganisms of that particle, then what? If we were to comprehend this when we're flattered, we would carry out a transformation of the impressions related to the praise and flattery or adulation, and as a result we would not react in the form of pride. The more we reflect on this, more and more we will see the necessity of a complete transformation of impressions. All that we see as external is interior. If we do not work with the interior, we are treading the path of error because we will not modify our habits. If we want to be different, we need to transform ourselves integrally, and we should begin by transforming impressions. By transforming the animal and bestial impressions into elements of devotion, sexual transformation, transmutation then surges forth in us. Unquestionably, this aspect of impressions deserves to be analyzed in a clear and precise manner. The personality that we have received or acquired receives the impressions of life but does not transform them because it is practically something dead. If the impressions fell directly upon the essence, it is obvious that they would be transformed because the essence would immediately deposit them exactly in the corresponding centers of the human machine. Personality is the term that is applied to everything that we acquire. It is clear that it translates impressions from all sides of life in a limited and practically stereotyped manner in accordance with its quality and association. In this respect, in the Gnostic esoteric work, the personality is sometimes compared to a terrible secretary who is in the front office, who is occupied with all the ideas, concepts, preconceptions, opinions, and prejudices. It has many dictionaries, encyclopedias of all types, reference books, etc., and is not in communication with the centers, in other words, with the mental, emotional, and the physical centers intellectual, motor, emotional, instinctive, and sexual, in accordance with its unusual ideas. Consequently, or as a corollary, it so happens that it almost always puts itself in communication with wrong centers. This means that the impressions that arrive are sent to wrong centers, in other words, to places which do not correspond to them, producing, naturally, erroneous results. I will mention an example so that I will be better understood. Let us suppose that a woman attends to a gentleman with much consideration and respect. It is clear that the impressions which the gentleman is receiving in his mind are received by the personality, and the latter sends them to wrong centers. Normally, it sends them to the sexual center, and this gentleman gets to firmly believe that the lady is in love with him, and as is logical, it does not take long before he rushes to make insinuations of an amorous type to her. Indubitably, if that lady has never had that type of caring for the gentleman, with much reason, she cannot but feel surprised. That is the result of a terrible transformation of impressions. Here we see how bad a secretary the personality is. Unquestionably, the life of a man depends on this secretary who seeks transformation in its reference books without comprehending in the least what the event means, and consequently transmits, without preoccupations for what could happen, but feeling only that it is fulfilling its duty. This is our interior situation. What is important to comprehend in This allegory is that the human personality that we acquire and which we should acquire begins to take charge of our lives. Unquestionably, it is useless to imagine that this happens only to certain and specific persons. It happens to everyone no matter who it is. One finds out in observation that numerous characteristic reactions exist which are produced by the impressions which reach us. These mechanical reactions, unfortunately, govern us. It is clear that each person in life is governed by life itself. It does not matter if he calls himself liberal or conservative, revolutionary or Bolshevik, good or bad in the sense of the word. It is obvious that these reactions before the impacts of the exterior world constitute our own life. In this sense, we can say in an emphatic manner that humanity is completely mechanical. Any man, in life, has formed for himself an enormous quantity of reactions, which come to be the practical experiences of his existence. It is clear that every action produces its reaction, actions of a certain type, and such reactions are called experiences. The important thing would be, for example, in order to get to know better our actions and reactions, to be able to relax the mind. This mental relaxation is magnificent. To lie down on one's bed or on a comfortable armchair, to relax all the muscles patiently and then empty the mind of oil types of thoughts, desires, emotions, memories. When the mind is still, when the mind is in silence, we can know ourselves better. In such moments of stillness and mental silence is when we really come to experience in a direct manner the crude realism of all the actions of practical life. When the mind is in absolute repose, we see the multitude of elements and sub-elements, actions and reactions, desires, passions, etc. as something foreign to us, but which awaits the precise instant to be able to exercise its control over ourselves, over our personality. That is the reason why the silence and stillness of the mind is worthwhile. Obviously, the relaxation of the mind is beneficial in the most complete sense of the word, for it leads us to individual self-knowledge. So it is that all of life, in other words, exterior life, what we see and live, is for each person, his reaction to the impressions which arrive from the physical world. It is a great error to think that what is called life is a fixed, solid thing, and the same for each person. Certainly, there is not a single person who has the same impressions which, with respect to life, exist in the human species, because they are infinite. Life, certainly, are our impressions of it, and it is clear that we can, if we so resolved it, transform such impressions. But as it was said, this is an idea which is very difficult to understand or comprehend because the hypnotism of the senses is very powerful. Although it may seem incredible, all human beings are in a state of collective hypnosis. Such hypnosis is produced by the residual state of the abominable Kundartagwaiter organ. When the latter was eliminated, the different psychic aggregates or inhuman elements, which in their mass constitute the myself, the oneself, remained. These elements and sub-elements, in turn, condition the consciousness and keep it in a state of hypnosis. In this manner, therefore, hypnosis of a collective type exists. The entire world is hypnotized. The mind is engrossed in the world of the five senses and does not manage to comprehend how it could become independent of them. It firmly believes that it is a god. Our interior life, the true life of thoughts and feelings, continues being confused for our mere reasoning and intellective conceptions. Nonetheless, at the same time we know very well that the place where we really live is our world of thoughts and feelings. This is something that no one can deny. Life is our impressions, and the latter can be transformed. We need to learn to transform our impressions. However, it is not possible to transform anything in us if we continue attached to the world of the five senses. As I have said in my treatise of revolutionary psychology, experience teaches one that if the Gnostic esoteric work is negative, it is because one's own fault. It is from the sensorial point of view that this or that person of the exterior world whom one sees and hears through the eyes and the ears has the blame. This person in turn will say that we are the ones to blame. But really, the fault is in the impressions that we may have about people. Many times, we think that a person is perverse when in reality the person is a humble lamb. It is very convenient to learn to transform all the impressions which we may have of life. We have to learn to receive with gladness the unpleasant manifestations of our fellow men. The mental stomach. As we studied in the previous chapter, we know that there are 3 types of foods: those related with breathing, with food properly said, and with impressions. The digestion of food brings about, as a result, the assimilation of vital principles for the blood. The result of respiration is the assimilation of oxygen, which is so valuable for human life. The assimilation or digestion of impressions brings about, as a result, the absorption of energy finer than the other 2. The 5 senses correspond to impressions. There are 2 types of impressions, pleasant and unpleasant. The human being needs to know how to live, but for that, he has to learn to digest and transform impressions, and this is vital for comprehension. We have to transform impressions if we truly want to know how to live. All impressions which reach the mind have hydrogen-48. Unfortunately, the human being lives mechanically. Man can transform hydrogen-48 into 24 to fortify the chakras, hydrogen. 24 into 12 to fortify the mind, and hydrogen, 12 into 6 to fortify the will. In actuality, one needs to transform the mind, to move on to a new mental level, or otherwise, impressions will continue arriving at the same wrong places of always. People believe that they are able to see things from different angles and that they are sovereign, but they do not realize that the human mind is limited by preconceptions and prejudices. In these modern times, we need to transform the mental apparatus. We need to be different. The fabrication of a superior intellectual apparatus, which is adequate to transform and digest impressions, becomes urgent and necessary. In the same manner that the digestive apparatus has a stomach in order for food to be assimilated, and in the same manner that the respiratory system has lungs to assimilate oxygen, the mechanical man should create a mental stomach. Do not confuse it or interpret it as a physical one. Before digesting impressions, we have to transform them. The Gnostic teaching permits and facilitates the creation of said stomach, in order to make of the intellectual animal something different. The necessity of transformation cannot be born without having comprehended such a necessity. This comprehension surges upon having the Gnostic teaching. When one thinks differently and positively about people, it is a sign that one is changing. We need to cease being what we are in order to become what we are not. One has to become lost to oneself. The result of all of this is the appearance of someone who is not oneself. In the path of the transformation of impressions, we have to be sincere with ourselves, and we are not to persuade ourselves. In the beginning, there appears justification in us, but we need to study that such justification can be the fruit of self-esteem. We need to discover the causes and motives of our behavior before impressions. When impressions are transformed, everything becomes new. Only the masters of the occult fraternity can immediately transform impressions, whereas human machines do not transform them. The conscious man can modify situations brought about by past, present, and future impressions. If people are not capable of transforming circumstances, they will continue being toys of circumstances and of others. Life has an objective, and that is of a superior world. The Gnostic teachings teach how to live a superior world, how to live in a solar and immortal humanity. If one did not accept a superior world, transformation would not have a purpose. That is obvious. The mind, as it is now, is not good for anything. One needs to organize it, remodel it, furnish it, etc., in other words, place it on a superior intellectual level. In order to be able to transform impressions, we need to reconstruct the scene just as it happened and find out what it was that hurt us the most. If there is no digestion of impressions, there will be any nourishment. If there is no nourishment, the existential bodies of the being will languish. The eye is governed and nourished with hydrogen-48. Each day, each hour, new eye are continuously being born. For example, mosquitoes bother us, the rain also, etc. There is always an addition and subtraction of eye. Good impressions should also be transformed. If during the day one has had 3 impressions which have affected one's mood, they should be studied and transformed at night, utilizing an orderly procedure. Each eye is linked with others and they are associated. The eye join together to form the same scene. We have to be analytical and judicious in order to transform impressions, so that as a result, new faculties will appear. When persons do not transform themselves, they continue having a shameful and ridiculous state. Where there is no digestion, one is involuting. We have to digest the impressions of the same day. Do not permit the sun to set on your anger. We have to see things as they are. We have to create the mental apparatus, the mental stomach, which is convenient in order to not be victims of anything. The system to transform the impressions of the day. 1. Absolute relaxation. 2. Reach the state of meditation. 3. Relive the scene just as it occurred. 4. Seek within oneself the I which caused the problem. 5. Observing serenely, one places the ego in the defendant's bench and one then proceeds with the judgment. 6. Ask the Divine Mother Kundalini for the disintegration of the I problem. Chapter 2. Image, Values, and Identity. In mental dynamics, we need to know something about how and why the mind functions. In mental dynamics, it is urgent to know something about the how and why of the different functionalisms of the mind. A realistic system is needed if we truly want to know the potential of the human mind. We need to improve the quality of values, identity, and image of ourselves. I think that a change of values, image, and identity is fundamental. The intellectual animal, mistakenly called man, has educated himself to deny his authentic identity, values, and image. To accept the negative culture, subjectively installed in our mind, in our interior, following the path of least resistance, is absurd. We need an objective culture. To accept just like that, following the line of least resistance, the subjective culture of this decadent era, is unquestionably absurd. We need to undergo a total revolution and a definitive change in this matter of image, values, and identity. The exterior image of man, and the diverse circumstances that surround him, are the exact result of his exterior image and of his psychological processes. Self-image is different. It is the inner KM, the cosmic man, the cosmos man, our divine prototype, the real being. Image, values, and identity should be changed radically. This is integral revolution. We need the identity of the being, values of the being, and image of the being. If we discover the reserves of intelligence contained in the mind, we can liberate it. The reserves of intelligence are the different parts of the being which orient us in the work related with the disintegration of the ego and with the liberation of the mind. The reserves of intelligence, contained in the mind, orient us in the work related with the liberation of the mind. The values of the being constitute the intelligence. The reserves of intelligence are the diverse parts of the being that guide and orient us in the psychological work related to the annihilation of the ego and the liberation of the mind. Let us always make a differentiation between mind and being. When someone accepts that the mind is bottled up in the ego, it indicates that he has begun to mature. In the matter of the dissolution of the ego, it is necessary to combine structural and transactional analysis. Only the values of the intelligence can liberate the mind through the disintegration of the undesirable psychic elements. Self-criticism. We should be sincere with our own selves and dissect the I with the tremendous scalpel of self-criticism. It is absurd to criticize the errors of others. What is fundamental is to discover our own errors and then disintegrate them on the basis of analysis and profound comprehension. It is only possible to act collectively when each individual is capable of acting individually with full and absolute consciousness of what is being done. The systems of the revolution of the dialectic will seem very lengthy to impatient people. However, another way does not exist. Those who want fast and immediate changes in the psychological and social order create rigid norms, dictatorships of the mind. They do not aspire to others knowing how to think, but rather dictate what has to be thought. Every abrupt change defrauds its own objective, and man becomes a victim once again of that which he struggled against. Within our own selves are all the causes of the failure of any organization. Self-image. This matter of identifying, imagining, and valuing oneself correctly should not be confused with the marvelous doctrine of non-identification. Instead of retaining in our mind a senile and degenerated culture, we need to re-educate ourselves. We need to have an exact concept about our own selves. Each person has a false concept about himself. It is undelayable to re-encounter our own selves, to auto-know, re-educate and re-evaluate ourselves correctly. The mind bottled up within the ego ignores the authentic values of the being. How could the mind recognize what it has never known? Mental freedom is only possible by liberating the mind. The false concepts have bottled up the mind. The exterior is merely the reflection of the interior. The image of a man gives origin to his exterior image. The exterior is the mirror where the interior is reflected. Any person is the result of his own mental processes. Man should auto-explore his own mind if he wishes to identify value and self-imagine himself correctly. Human thoughts are 99% negative and harmful. Self-adoration. In the interaction in society exists self-discovery, self-revelation. Really, when the mind is in alert perception during interaction, the hidden defects flourish, leap forward, then we see them as they are in ourselves. All of us human beings, deep within, are narcissists, in love with our own selves. Observe a singer on the theater stage. He is madly in love with himself, he adores, idolizes himself, and when applause pours on him, he reaches the climax of his self-adoration, for that is precisely what he wants, what he aspires to, what he awaits with infinite thirst. Really, vanity is the living manifestation of self-esteem. The I adorns itself in order for others to adore it. When the ego begins to control the personality of the child, spontaneous beauty disappears, then the overestimation of the beloved is initiated and the child dreams with dominating the world and becoming the most powerful person of the earth. Self-judgment. The man who permits that which is called self-judgment or inner judgment to express itself in a spontaneous manner within him will be guided by the voice of the conscience and he will march on the straight path. Every man who is subjected to self-judgment, in fact, becomes by his own right a good citizen, a good husband, a good missionary, a good parent, etc. In order to know our inner contradictions, it is necessary to auto-discover ourselves. The one who discovers himself can work with success in the dissolution of the pluralized I. Inner contradictions are based on the plurality of the I. The tremendous contradictions that we carry within make our lives painfully bitter. We are laborers, and we want to be potentates, soldiers, and we want to be generals. We think of acquiring our own house, and once we have obtained it, we sell it because it tires us, and we want another one. We are content with nothing. We seek happiness in ideas in them, too, march and file and pass. We seek happiness in interaction, with friends, who are with us today and against us tomorrow. We see, therefore, that everything is illusory. Nothing in life can give us happiness. With so many contradictions, we are wretched persons. It is necessary to put an end to the pluralized I. It is only in this manner that we can put an end to the secret origin of all of our contradictions and bitterness. Those who have already dissolved the I, in fact, possess the PCC. In the world there exist many schools and systems and many people who live like butterflies, flitting from school to school, always full of inner contradictions, always dissatisfied, always seeking the path, and they do not find it, even when it is very close to their eyes. The pluralized I does not let them see the path of truth and life. The worst enemy of illumination is the I. A master was asked, "What is the way?" "What a magnificent mountain," he said about the mountain where he had his retreat. "I do not ask you about the mountain, but rather about the way. As long as you cannot go beyond the mountain, you will not be able to find the way," replied the master. The I can also do good deeds and gain many merits which improve its psychological character, but it will never be able to reach illumination. We should seek illumination, for everything else shall be added on to us. It is impossible to reach illumination without having the PCC. It is impossible to have a permanent center of consciousness without having dissolved the pluralized I. The self-idea. Intellectual information and others' ideas is not experienced. Erudition is not. Experimentation. The exclusively three-dimensional rehearsal, test, or demonstration is not unitotal. Opinions, concepts, theories, and hypotheses do not mean verification, experimentation, full consciousness about this or that phenomenon. There must exist a faculty that is superior than the mind, one that is independent of the intellect, that is capable of giving us direct experience and knowledge about any phenomenon. It is only by liberating ourselves from the mind that we can truly experience that which is real, that which exists in a potential state behind any phenomenon. The world is nothing more but an illusory mental form which will inevitably dissolve at the end of the great cosmic day. I, myself, your body, my friends, things, my family, etc., are in the end that which the Hindus call Maya, illusion, vain mental forms which will be reduced to cosmic dust sooner or later. My affections, the most beloved beings which surround me, etc., are simple forms of the cosmic mind. They do not have real existence. Intellectual dualism, such as pleasure and pain, praises and insults, victory and defeat, wealth and misery, constitute the painful mechanism of the mind. Auto-idea and true happiness cannot exist within us as long as we are slaves of the mind. Nobody can develop the auto-idea and true happiness as long as he is a slave of the mind. That which is real is not a matter of textual assumptions or other people's ideas, but rather of direct experience. Whoever frees himself from the intellect can experience and feel an element which transforms radically. When we free ourselves of the mind, the latter then becomes a ductile, elastic, useful vehicle by means of which we express ourselves. Superior logic invites us to think that to emancipate oneself from the mind is in fact equivalent to awakening consciousness, to putting an end to automatism. But let us get down to brass tacks. Who or what is it that should get away from others' mortifying ideas? It is obvious to answer these questions by saying, the conscience, that which is part of the soul in us, is what can and should liberate itself. Others' ideas of pseudo-literature only serve to make our existence bitter. Authentic happiness is only possible when we emancipate ourselves from the intellect. However, we should recognize that a major inconvenience for that aspired liberation of consciousness exists. I want to refer to the tremendous battle of the antithesis. The essence or conscience, unfortunately, lives bottled up within the exaggerated intellective dualism of the opposites, yes and no, good and evil, tall and short, mine and yours, pleasure and displeasure, pleasure and pain, etc. It is clearly brilliant to comprehend in depth that when the tempest of borrowed ideas in the ocean of the mind ceases, and the struggle of the opposites ends, the essence escapes, submerges itself in that which is real and emanates the auto-idea, the seed idea with all its splendor. Chapter 3. Mo Chao. The Chinese word Mo means silent or serene. Chao means to reflect or to observe. Mo Chao, therefore, can be translated as serene reflection or serene observation. The difficult, laborious, arduous, and painful thing is to achieve absolute mental silence in all the levels of the subconscious. To reach stillness and silence in the mere superficial intellectual level or in a few subconscious departments is not sufficient because the essence continues bottled up within the submerged, infraconscious and unconscious dualism. A blank mind is something too superficial, empty, and intellectual. We need serene reflection if we truly want to achieve the absolute stillness and silence of the mind. However, it is clear to comprehend that in pure Gnosticism, the terms serenity and reflection have much more profound meanings and hence should be comprehended within their special connotations. The feeling of serene transcends that which is normally understood by calm or tranquility. It implies a superlative state which is beyond reasoning, desires, contradictions, and words. It designates a situation which is beyond worldly noise. Likewise, the meaning of reflection is beyond what is understood as contemplation of a problem or idea. Here it does not imply mental activity or contemplative thinking, but rather a kind of clear and reflexive objective consciousness, always enlightened in its own experience. Therefore, serene, in this context, is the serenity of non-thinking, and reflection means intense and clear consciousness. Serene reflection is clear consciousness in the tranquility of non-thinking. When perfect serenity reigns, one achieves true, profound enlightenment. Dispersed mind and integral mind. In mental dynamics, it is urgent to know how and why the mind functions. It is only by resolving how and why that we can make of the mind a useful instrument. Intellectual liberty is only possible on the basis of understanding, comprehension, and knowledge of the different functionalisms of the mind. It is only by knowing the diverse mechanisms of the mind that we free ourselves from the mind in order to make of it a useful instrument. It is undelayable to know ourselves if in reality we want to control our own mind in an integral manner. Hippocrates, the great physician, was one of the classical masters of the mind. The human mind is conditioned. Will without chains is only possible by dissolving the ego. The mind should become an obedient mechanism to man. Maturity begins when we accept the reality that the human mind is conditioned. It is possible to achieve the liberation of the mind if we discover the intelligence it possesses. We need an integral mind instead of a dispersed mind. The revolution of meditation. The technique of meditation permits us to arrive at the heights of illumination and the revolution of the dialectic. We should distinguish between a mind that is still and a mind that is stilled by force. When the mind is stilled by force, it is really not still. It is gagged by violence, and in the deeper levels of understanding, there is an entire tempest. When the mind is silenced violently, it is really not in silence, and deep within, it clamors, shouts, and despairs. It is necessary to put an end to modifications of the thinking principle during meditation. When the thinking principle remains under our control, illumination comes to us spontaneously. Mental control permits us to destroy the shackles created by the mind. To achieve the stillness and silence of the mind, it is necessary to know how to live from instant to instant, to know how to take advantage of each moment, to not live the moment in doses. Take everything from each moment, because each moment is a child of gnosis, each moment is absolute, alive and significant. Momentaneity is a special characteristic of the Gnostics. We love the philosophy of momentaneity. Master said to his disciples, "If you walk, walk, if you sit, sit. But do not vacillate." A first study in the technique of meditation is the antechamber of that divine peace that surpasses all knowledge. The most elevated form of thinking is non-thinking. When one achieves the stillness and silence of the mind, the I with all its passions, desires, appetites, fears, affections, etc. becomes absent. It is only in the absence of the I, in the absence of the mind, that the Buddhata can awaken to unite with the inner self and take us to ecstasy. It is false, as is pretended by the school of black magic of the suburb, that the monad or the great reality will penetrate in him who does not possess the superior existential bodies of the being. What enters in the tenebrous fanatics of the suburb are the tenebrous entities that are expressed in them with gestures, actions, bestial and absurd words. Those people are possessed by the tenebrous ones. The stillness and silence of the mind has a single objective: liberate the essence from the mind so that fused with the monad or inner self, it, the essence, can experience that which we call the truth. During ecstasy and in the absence of the I, the essence can live freely in the world of the mist of fire, experiencing the truth. When the mind is in a passive and receptive state, absolutely still and in silence, the essence or Buddhata is liberated from the mind and ecstasy arrives. The essence is always bottled up in the battle of the opposites, but when the battling ends and the silence is absolute, the essence remains free and the bottle broken into pieces. When we practice meditation, our mind is assaulted by many memories, desires, passions, preoccupations, etc. We should avoid the conflict between attention and abstraction. A conflict exists between distraction and attention when we combat those assailants of the mind. The I is the projector of said mental assailants. Where there is conflict, stillness and silence do not exist. We should nullify the projector through self-observation and comprehension. Examine each image, each memory, each thought that comes to the mind. Remember that every thought has two poles, positive and negative. Entering and leaving are two aspects of a same thing. The dining room and the bathroom, tall and short, pleasant and unpleasant, etc., are always two poles of the same thing. Examine the two poles of each mental form that comes to the mind. Remember that only through the study of these polarities, one arrives at the synthesis. Every mental form can be eliminated through the synthesis. Example, the memory of a fiancé assaults us. Is she beautiful? Let us think that beauty is the opposite of ugliness and that if, in her youth she is beautiful, in her old age, she will be ugly. The synthesis, it is not worth it to think about her, she is an illusion, a flower that inevitably withers. In India, this self-observation and study of our psyche is properly called pratyahara. Bird-like thoughts should pass through the space of our own mind in a successive parade, but without leaving any trace. The infinite procession of thoughts projected by the eye, in the end are exhausted, and then the mind remains still and in silence. A great self-realized master said, only when the projector, in other words, the eye, is completely absent, then befalls the silence which is not a product of the mind. This silence is inexhaustible, it is not of time, it is the immeasurable, only then arrives that which is. This whole technique is summarized in two principles. 1. Profound reflection. 2. Tremendous serenity. This technique of meditation with its non-thinking puts to work the most central part of the mind, the one that produces the ecstasy. Remember that the central part of the mind is that which is called buddhata, the essence, the conscience. When the buddhata awakens, we remain illuminated. We need to awaken the buddhata, the conscience. The Gnostic student can practice meditation seated in the Western or Oriental style. It is advisable to practice with eyes closed to avoid the distractions of the exterior world. It is also convenient to relax the body carefully, avoiding any muscle remaining in tension. The buddhata, the essence, is the psychic material, the inner Buddhist principle, the spiritual material or prime matter with which we will give shape to the soul. The buddhata is the best that we have within and awakens with profound inner meditation. The buddhata is really the only element that the poor intellectual animal possesses to arrive at the experience of that which we call the truth. The only thing that the intellectual animal can do, unable to incarnate the being due to the fact that he still does not possess the superior existential bodies, is to practice meditation to auto-awaken the buddhata and know the truth. Mechanical association. Eisen sent a mirror to Master Koizan. Koizan showed it to his monks and said, "Is this Eisen's mirror or my mirror? If you say that it belongs to Eisen, how is it that it is in my hands? If you say that it is mine, have I not received it from Eisen's hands? Speak, speak, if not I will break it to pieces." The monks were unable to pass between those two opposites, and the master broke the mirror into pieces. Ecstasy is impossible as long as the essence is bottled up in the opposites. In the times of Babylon, the bodhisattva of the most holy Ashyata Shimash, a great avatar, came to the world. The bodhisattva was not fallen, and like every bodhisattva, he had his superior existential bodies of the being normally developed. When he reached a responsible age, he arrived at the Vizinian mountain and entered a cavern. The tradition narrates that he carried out 3 tremendous fasts of 40 days, each accompanied by intentional and voluntary suffering. He dedicated the first fast to praying and meditating. The second fast was dedicated to reviewing his entire life and his past lives. The third fast was definitive. It was dedicated to putting an end to the mechanical association of the mind. He did not eat and only drank water, and every half hour, he pulled out the hairs from his chest. There are 2 types of mechanical association which are the foundation of the opposites. A. Mechanical association by means of ideas, words, phrases, etc. B. Mechanical association by images, forms, things, persons, etc. An idea associates with another, a word with another, a phrase with another, and the battle of the opposites follows. One person associates with another, the memory of someone comes to his mind. An image associates with another, a form with another, and the battle of the opposites continues. The bodhisattva of the avatar Ashyata Shimash suffered the unutterable, and fasting for 40 days, mortifying himself horribly, sunk in profound inner meditation, he achieved the disassociation of the mental mechanics and his mind remained solemnly still and in imposing silence. The result was ecstasy with the incarnation of his real being. Ashiata Shimash carried out a great work in Asia, founding monasteries and establishing rulers with awakened consciousness everywhere. This bodhisattva was able to incarnate his real being during meditation because he already possessed the superior existential bodies of the being. Those who do not have the superior existential bodies of the being cannot succeed in getting the divinity or the being to operate or incarnate in them, but they are able to liberate the essence so that it will fuse with the being and participate of his ecstasy. In the state of ecstasy, we can study the great mysteries of life and death. We have to study the ritual of life and death until the officiant, the inner self, the being, arrives. It is only in the absence of the I that one can experience the bliss of the being. Only in the absence of the I can ecstasy come. When one achieves the dissolution of the mental mechanics, then comes that which Orientals call the breaking of the bag, eruption of the void. Then there is a shout of joy because the essence, the Buddhata, has escaped from within the battle of the opposites and now participates in the communication of the saints.